The silent arrival of war. In the farthest reaches of the known galaxy, where cosmic storms raged and the nebulae painted the void in shifting hues, the planet Sci-Fi stood as a testament to the delicate balance of diplomacy and conflict. A lush world with a rich atmosphere, it was one of the few habitable planets that both humans and the Xaltec, an ancient and expansionist alien empire, coveted. For centuries, the Xaltec had dominated vast stretches of space, crushing lesser civilizations beneath their technological might. Their empire thrived on structure, rigid war doctrines, and a belief that warfare was nothing more than an organized means to an end. Every species they encountered had either submitted or been erased. They had never known an adversary who played outside the rules, until they met humanity. The conflict began not with battle but with ink and arrogance. Humanity, ever opportunistic and bold, had settled on Sci-Fi after purchasing the right to do so from an obscure faction of the Xaltec, a faction that the ruling War Council deemed insignificant. However, once the humans arrived and began constructing their outposts, the Xaltec saw it as a grave insult. The first phase of war had begun, though no shots had been fired. The Xaltec were outraged, but followed their protocol, initiating a formal dispute. For the humans, it was just another round of bureaucracy. They were willing to negotiate, to pay more if necessary, but they refused to leave. For months, the tension simmered. The second phase arrived when the Xaltec Council refused any further diplomacy. Their laws dictated that if peaceful resolutions failed, the enemy would be given a period to vacate the territory. The humans, however, saw this as nothing more than posturing. They had seen this tactic before with other alien species, those who threatened war, but ultimately sought better negotiations. But the Xaltec were not like those species. They did not threaten war lightly. Humanity's refusal to leave marked the third phase. Official declarations were sent across the galactic communication networks. A state of war existed between the Xaltec Empire and the United Terran Coalition. Yet, war in the galaxy followed a script. The Xaltec had fought hundreds of conflicts before, and each battle followed the same pattern. Economic sanctions, targeted skirmishes, controlled battles on designated warfronts. They assumed the humans would follow the same rules. But the humans did not. The fourth phase was supposed to be the initiation of combat. In traditional interstellar warfare, the Xaltec expected grand declarations and strategic skirmishes, allowing both sides to assess the other before engaging in full-scale battle. Instead, the humans disappeared. Entire outposts were abandoned overnight. Communications fell silent. Sci-Fi's planetary defense grid, something that the Xaltec had anticipated breaching with strategic strikes, was left online but completely unmanned. The human presence vanished as if they had never existed. The Xaltec hesitated, confused. Had humanity retreated without resistance? Had they surrendered through absence? It was not unheard of. Many species, upon realizing the futility of resistance, would simply leave. Yet, deep within the War Council, a few advisors urged caution. Humans, they warned, were unpredictable. But the High Commander dismissed the concerns. He declared victory. Troops landed on Sci-Fi's surface, securing human structures and marking them for dismantling. The planet would be purged of all human influence within a standard cycle. The soldiers relaxed, preparing for the fifth phase of war, a controlled invasion with set parameters. That was when the first detonation occurred. In the dead of night, an entire Xaltec garrison, stationed inside a repurposed human facility, was vaporized in an explosion that turned their outpost into a smoldering crater. There was no warning, no enemy ships in orbit, no obvious attackers. The Xaltec only realized what had happened when their reinforcements found the remains of their comrades scattered across the blackened earth. Then, the sabotage began. Supply depots burst into flames without a single enemy being spotted. Xaltec battleships in orbit reported power failures, their systems overridden by malicious code that had been embedded in their own networks. Communications relays malfunctioned, cutting off entire battalions from command. Shadows moved in the forests, striking unseen and vanishing before alarms could be raised. The War Council reeled. This was no formal battle. There were no lines drawn, no territories officially contested. This was something else entirely. Something insidious, something terrifying. This was not war. This was humanity. The Toltec had spent centuries refining war into an art, a predictable dance of power and submission. They had created rules, systems, and honor codes. And yet these creatures from Earth, these primitive beings with their short lifespans and reckless nature, had rewritten the script. They fought with deception, with sabotage, with an unrelenting audacity that defied logic. This was war without order, without honor. This was chaos. And the Toltec were utterly unprepared. The ghosts in the shadows. The Toltec had faced countless species in war, but they had never encountered anything like this. War, to them, was a structured event, an extension of politics carried out through disciplined combat. But what they faced on Sci-Fi was not war as they understood it. It was something far more insidious, far more terrifying. The humans were not fighting a war. They were hunting. At first, the High Commander dismissed the sabotage as mere remnants of human presence, accidents triggered by abandoned systems. But the reports from the field painted a different picture. Soldiers whispered of movements in the night, of patrols vanishing without a sound, of shadows that seemed to breathe, watching, waiting. Then came the first true horror. A Toltec forward command post, a towering structure meant to oversee the planet's occupation, was found abandoned. The doors were wide open, every single piece of equipment intact. But the personnel, nearly 200 elite warriors, were missing. There were no signs of battle, no blood, no bodies. It was as if they had simply ceased to exist. The War Council was perplexed. Had they deserted? Had the humans developed some new technology that could erase an entire outpost without leaving a trace? No one knew. And that was what terrified them the most. Orders were sent to secure the outpost, to investigate what had happened. A battalion of 1,000 troops landed at the facility, armed with the best tracking technology the Empire had. They found one survivor. He was curled up in a corner of the command room, shaking violently, his breathing ragged and shallow. His armor had been ripped apart, as if something had peeled it from his body. His eyes, once the vibrant gold of the Toltec species, were now glazed over, unfocused, broken. When they tried to speak to him, he muttered something in a strangled whisper. "The walls," they whispered. "They called my name." No one understood. And then he screamed, a piercing, unnatural wail that echoed through the corridors. He clawed at his own face, tearing into his flesh with desperate strength. It took 6 soldiers to restrain him, but before they could inject him with a sedative, he convulsed violently, his body locking up in unnatural spasms, before going limp. Dead. His face was twisted in horror. His final expression was one of pure, absolute fear. The battalion left the outpost immediately. No one spoke a word on the return to base. The silence before the storm. Across Sci-Fi, the pattern repeated. Supply lines collapsed. Ships docked in orbit reported system failures. Generals in the War Council who had once scoffed at human resistance now debated abandoning the planet entirely. The humans weren't fighting in open fields. They weren't engaging in duels of honor or test of strength battles. They were ghosts. They waited in the dark. They listened. They learned. The Toltec began finding cryptic messages left behind at their outposts, scratched into metal walls, written in their own language, crude yet chilling in their simplicity. "You are not the hunters. Run." Some of the warriors laughed at the primitive attempt at psychological warfare, but others had already seen too much. Entire squadrons refused to leave their bases at night. Armed patrols doubled in size. Some officers started refusing to enter human-occupied zones altogether. But fear alone would not win this war. The High Commander, despite the troubling reports, ordered a full-scale planetary sweep. If the humans refused to fight on open ground, then the Toltec would flush them out. Thousands of troops were deployed into the dense forests, into the abandoned human structures, into the deep caves where scanners detected movement. And that was exactly what the humans had been waiting for. The ambush. The first major offensive against the humans began at dawn. A massive contingent of Toltec warriors, led by General Walter, advanced into the largest remaining human outpost. It was a sprawling complex, filled with towering steel structures and underground tunnels. They entered expecting a battle. They found nothing. Every building was empty, every storage crate left untouched. Every door was wide open, welcoming them in. It was a trap. The first explosion took out the rear of the column, vaporizing an entire platoon in an instant. The second came from beneath as underground charges ripped through the main force, scattering debris and bodies into the air. Then the gunfire began, but not from an army. From the shadows, from the ruins, from places that Toltec could not see. Bullets screamed through the air, striking down soldiers with terrifying precision. Their energy shields, designed to withstand directed plasma bolts, were useless against the kinetic force of human weaponry. They tried to fight back, but the enemy was never there. They fired into the darkness, into buildings that had already been abandoned. They chased after ghosts, following movement that led them into dead ends. Every tactic they had trained for was useless. Then the voices started, echoing through their helmets, hijacking their communication lines. Human voices. Soft, calm, mocking. You should have left. Now, you belong to the dark. Panic set in. Squadrons broke formation. Some warriors turned on their own commanders, demanding retreat. But retreat was impossible. There was nowhere left to run. The last message intercepted from General Walter's command unit was fragmented, laced with static and screams. Not soldiers, not warriors. They are. Then silence. An entire legion was wiped out in a single night. The Toltec had always seen war as structured, predictable. But the humans had no rules, no boundaries. They did not fight to win battles. They fought to destroy their enemies. This was no longer a war. This was a nightmare. And the Toltec had just realized. They were the ones being hunted. The fear of the unseen. For the first time in Toltec history, an empire built on war, order, and unwavering discipline found itself on the brink of collapse, not from superior numbers, not from overwhelming firepower, but from an enemy that refused to fight by the rules. Humanity had no battle lines, no formations, no honor codes. They struck like phantoms, melted into the darkness, and left terror in their wake. The loss of an entire legion in a single night sent shockwaves through the War Council. What was meant to be a swift planetary sweep had turned into a massacre. It was no longer the humans who were at risk. It was the Toltec. And worse, they didn't even know who they were fighting. The vanishing soldiers. The War Council's first response was to reinforce planetary command. More troops, more surveillance, more defensive positions. If the humans were attacking from the shadows, then the Toltec would shine a light on every corner of the battlefield. But even that failed. It started small. A patrol unit stationed near the eastern ridge, 20 soldiers strong, stopped responding to communications. Their signal remained intact, their location untouched. When a second team was sent to investigate, they found nothing. No signs of battle. No blood, no bodies, just their abandoned weapons and armor, as if they had stripped themselves and walked away. At first, the council suspected desertion. The concept was unthinkable among the Toltec military. No warrior would abandon their duty. And yet, more patrols vanished. Then, the ships started disappearing. Orbiting battleships, each carrying thousands of warriors, stopped transmitting mid-shift. When scouts were sent to dock and investigate, they found the ships completely deserted. The reactor cores were intact, weapons fully operational, supplies untouched. But the crews were gone. Over 30,000 elite warriors had vanished without a single alarm being triggered. Panic began to spread, not just among the lower-ranked soldiers, but within the War Council itself. Something was hunting them. Something they couldn't see. And then the messages started. The whispering threat. Across Sci-Fi, command terminals flickered to life without warning. Screens, previously filled with standard military reports, were overwritten by a single sentence in perfect Caltech script. "We are already inside." It appeared on every interface: personal data pads, navigation consoles, weapons targeting systems, even the High Commander's private war terminal. Every attempt to remove the message failed. Every firewall, every countermeasure, useless. The message returned within seconds. Then the whispers began. At first, only a few officers reported hearing them. Soft, unintelligible murmurs coming through their helmets. But soon, entire battalions complained of the same thing. Voices drifting through their communication systems. No orders, no commands, just whispers. Some warriors claimed they recognized the voices. They spoke in the tones of missing comrades, of friends who had vanished without a trace. One officer, desperate for answers, responded to the whispers. He asked, "Who are you?" The reply came immediately. "We are what you created." His armor's life support system failed seconds later. His lungs collapsed, his body contorted in agony, and he died clawing at his own throat. The desperate council. The Caltech High Commander, a veteran of over 1,000 battles, had never known fear. He had stood on the front lines of entire planetary sieges. He had crushed civilizations under the weight of his empire's military might. But now, for the first time in his life, he felt true terror. This war was unlike anything he had ever faced. The humans were not playing by any known rules of engagement. They had turned his own army against itself. Their soldiers disappeared without battle. Their ships turned into floating graves. And now, the Caltech themselves were losing their minds. Entire squads were found dead in their barracks, without wounds, without a single shot fired. Their faces frozen in expressions of sheer horror. Medical reports revealed no known cause of death. Their hearts had simply stopped. The High Commander summoned an emergency war council. "The humans have done something to our minds," one general argued. "This is not warfare. This is a psychic attack. We should retreat," another officer declared, the first time in history that word had ever been spoken in the war chambers of the Caltech. But the High Commander refused. "We do not retreat," he growled. "We adapt." His solution: total planetary incineration. Scorched Earth. If the humans would not face them, if they continued to use the shadows as their weapon, then the Caltech would burn Sci-Fi to the ground. Entire forests, entire cities, anything that could serve as cover for the enemy would be reduced to ash. They began by deploying orbital bombardments. Massive plasma cannons rained fire from the sky, consuming entire regions in storms of heat and destruction. For days, the bombardment continued. Smoke choked the air, rivers turned to steam, and the once beautiful world of Sci-Fi became a wasteland. And yet, the attacks did not stop. The humans still struck, still whispered in the dark. One night, as the fires raged, a single human transmission was broadcast across every Caltech communication channel. A simple, chilling message: "Fire won't save you." The High Commander watched, unmoving, as the words scrolled across his war terminal. And then the lights flickered. And then the screams began again. The war had not ended. It had only just begun.